in some ways, the manager is kind of set up, in air quotes, to be the hero. Don't accept that.
Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and my co-host and twin today.
Yep, we're dressed just the same.
Yep, is Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow.
And today we're going to talk about how sharing your biggest management mistakes may be one of the kindest things that you can do to develop other people.
Yep, there you go. This episode is sponsored by the Uncertainty Playbook, our most recent book on why we don't take risks because we're too afraid in uncertain situations and how to correct that.
Available on Amazon.com.
Get it.
And if you leave a review, we'd be extra appreciative.
Yes, we would.
All right, on to the topic. You want to lay out the research findings?
Yeah, sure. So there's a psychologist. I can't remember if he's a psychologist or a pediatrician. And his wife is
Marshall Duke,
and his wife.
I can't remember her name.
Escapes me. Yeah, but they're both the Dukes. I forget what her name is. And they were doing a study on what makes kids resilient, and they happened to have one of their groups of kids were in Manhattan, and then 9/11 happened, and so they had what in social psychology you call a natural experiment. You're actually studying this thing, and then something happens where you can get a actual assessment of how did people recover from this trauma. And so they continued their study of resilience, and they focused in on the children in Manhattan who had had some kind of connection or exposure to 9/11, say my uncle was in the building or whatever, something like that. And they tried to discern over the years what made some of the kids a little more resilient than the others. And they never could find anything conclusive, but they had a lingering, unusual finding in their research, which was that the kids who scored the highest on what you and I would call family trivia, just a set of questions that they were asking.
So 20 questions, I think.
Yeah, as a way of collecting information. Like, do you know how your parents meet? Do you know the stories of any black sheep in the family? Just basically family trivia and folklore, the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of stuff. Kids who scored higher on those measures of family trivia tended to be more resilient, and they never could understand it. They didn't have a good theory for why this might be. And so they weren't taking it too seriously. They thought, well, maybe it's just something that correlates, but there's no real reason, or there's no real reason that we can discern.
Right. Meanwhile, they'd also tested every personality trait.
And none of it seemed to be predictive of resilience. And so one of the pair of the Dukes was talking to a friend of theirs who happened to read a lot of books. And he's like, oh, well, I understand why that is, why you're picking that up. And they're like, well, why? And he's like, yeah, you got to read this book. It's called In Every War But One. And it's by Eugene Kincaid. And it's about how during the Korean War, the North Koreans were able to get an unusually high number of Americans held in captivity to actually either turn against America or actually stay in their country once the war was over, which was mind-boggling. And, it was in the best interest of the armed forces to figure out how did this happen. And so Eugene Kincaid chronicles all this in this book, In Every War But One. And the basic insight was that you can't get anywhere with people who truly understand that America is imperfect and has a lot of warts. And so it may be a great country, but there's a lot of racism. It may be a great country, but it's hard to get ahead if you're poor. Those types of imperfections
Like loving something while also being able to look at it honestly and see that it's got imperfections.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the North Koreans wouldn't isolate or try to work on anybody who had that kind of warts and all view of America. They would instead focus on the mom and apple pie, the people who had a more two-dimensional view of America.
Or in today's terminology, a more Facebook view of America.
More superficial, like, this is my country. I love it. This country's close to perfect. Well,
you kind of see some people who, I think you can identify some people just naturally who probably fall into this. Like, you say something negative about the country that is true, and we're part of this country, and you will get people who have a very negative defensive reaction to it. And that's an indication that they're sort of this apple pie kind of person.
Yeah. And so that's who the North Koreans focused on. That's who, over a period of weeks and months of basically re-education, were able to show them evidence of, here's some examples of racism in America. Here's some examples where poverty is structural, meaning very hard to overcome. Here's some examples of, the country making mistakes in the past. Like, lay this out when
over
someone's
and
in
over
captivity.
Into captivity. Yeah. Right. And so basically they break the person's model.
And so that's the answer. And so the person that Marshall Duke or his wife was having lunch with said, that's what's going on in your study, is that your family trivia is picking up which child has a more in-depth understanding of their family, obviously age appropriate, but warts and all. Do they know how their parents actually met? Do they know when the family struggled? Do they know who the black sheep of the family is? This kind of thing. And it's those people who tend to be more resilient. That's a richer, more 3D understanding of the family than someone who believes our family's had it good, things keep getting better. And those stories became known as those kind of up and down, what's known as an oscillating narrative, what you and I are calling in here 3D. And that does seem to contribute to resilience, knowing that things may be good now, but there have been dips before. And this isn't the first time that there's been a setback. And that if things look bad today, well, they've been bad before, but we overcame some of these things. And so that's why we wanted to talk in this episode about how helping people see how you've made mistakes, how things haven't been great before in the company may actually counterintuitively serve to help your people persist in the face of obstacles. The other thing that I think is instructive about this, so you tell you another story, is it's been a while, but I was at the University of Texas, and I got on a committee that at the time we were losing a lot of Latina students in the second semester of their freshman year, that they would make a couple bad grades or have a low grade in a class, and they would call home, and the mom or the dad, being concerned, would say, like, look, just so you know, if this college thing isn't working out, you can always come home. And too many of these Latina students who, by every other measure, their GPA, their SAT scores, the way they were doing in their classes, suggested that they were going to graduate. They weren't going to have any problem graduating from the University of Texas, but they would actually go home. They would quit. They would withdraw from the university. And so the small committee I was on was trying to figure out, well, what do we do? What's the intervention? How do we try to prevent this from happening? We want to keep more of these students in the particular geographical, we were thinking about the Valley in Texas, and then in El Paso was where a lot of these students were coming from these Latina families. And a wise professor pointed out to us this research about resilience. And she said, the intervention isn't with the students. The intervention is with the parents. And we need to tell the parents that when the student calls, they're not thinking broadly enough about all of the challenges that family's overcome. They're just thinking they don't know college. And they're thinking about their prize student who up to this point has basically made straight A's in high school. These are mostly the kind of students we're getting here at the University of Texas. And so the parents don't have a schema, mental representation for everybody makes C's in college. And it's not unusual to fail a test or two and all this kind of stuff. But tell the parents instead to gently remind the student, hey, remember how hard it was for us? Remember when we struggled, whatever the case may be. And then remind the student, like, that's in your DNA. You're gonna get over this. You can do this. And that that turned out to be an easy intervention by just having some of the liaison, the admission folks, remind the parents at the kind of orientations that we were doing out in the Valley and in El Paso. And it actually helped in the subsequent, I don't know if they're still doing it, but in the subsequent semesters, it actually increased the retention of those particular students coming in from largely those two geographical areas of Texas.
Yeah, well, when I think about that in terms of work, I remember my advisor basically couldn't get rid of a mom who wasn't happy that her daughter got an A-, or maybe it was a B+, and was just relentless, like not accepting it, trying to force her will. And like you hear a lot of stories about that. And technically, like because of what is it?
Oh,
it's a FIPA.
Yeah, the disclosure.
Technically, you're not allowed to talk to a parent about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if the kid's 18. Yeah.
Yeah, and even doesn't matter if you're paying for them or not. They're 18. They have privacy, but it's that relentless pursuit by the parent that doesn't accept the valleys, and then you hear some of the consequences in the workforce where you have people who just absolutely cannot take any feedback. And I wonder if it's all just this frailty that, for lack of a better term, because this is definitely going back a ways, but the helicopter parenting basically created. Because I think if you look out across this country right now, there's a good percentage of it appears, that has a very hard time with any criticism on something that they love. They have a very shallow view, or a very brittle view. Yeah, a requirement for perfection, right? A 2D view of themselves, the country. I don't need maybe their work, their football team.
Sure.
And it's not serving any of us very well, in that we basically have stopped being able to have a lot of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the research, they separate the three narratives. The oscillating that we talked about tends to be the healthiest and most resilient. I know there's ups, I know there's downs. It's like the grandparents' wisdom from years and years and years ago of, you're never as good as you think, if you're never as bad as you think either. You're kind of,
you're somewhere in there.
Ups and downs. Yeah. Well, we know that the descending narrative of things used to be great, but now they're terrible. Well, that's very demotivating. So that's not a good story to have in your head. But what you're pointing out, which I think is important for this podcast and for people out there, is the ascending narrative is also problematic, because things keep getting better. That bar is so hard to clear that it's unrealistic.
I would say it's unrealistic. It's an expectations problem. There's a lot of pressure to only put out for public consumption, like the good things.
Well, yeah, I mean, not to be a broken record to everybody listening, but I think there's a fairly widespread acknowledgement that a lot of what is done on social media is
negative.
Well, it's impression management.
Yes.
It's putting the best foot
Yeah,
forward.
it hasn't been good for mentality. There's been a fair amount of research on that.
Yeah, partly because if everybody is selecting their best moments when their beautiful kids make the vegan brownies. Right.
You've got the ascending story with none of the oscillation.
So I think a lot of people know if all you're presenting is the good, that's not realistic. That's a very high bar. And eventually, what do you do when your own life can't live up to that? When the inevitable setbacks come in your own life?
Well, and I think you see that in the research that has been done on social media that has shown how damaging it can be to mental well-being.
Yeah.
Logically, you should be able to say, okay, like it's not all vegan brownies that are delicious.
Right. And not all of my friends are always on the beach and the other half are flying around in private jets.
Right.
And so, and that's the key word. I mean, I think it may take a while, but I think the main problem of social media is that humans, we evolved to be highly socially comparative, which is just a goofy way of saying to constantly be looking for how's everybody else doing and how am I fitting in? And that's what helped us live together in groups. That's what helped us stay in the tribe and get along, fit in. But our instincts weren't meant to have everybody on an electronic medium where you're comparing not just to the people within your tribe around your campfire, but the whole.
Right. Where you might see the other side just by being around them. If it's just your tribe in their campfire, maybe they are only talking about the vegan brownies that are delicious, but you're also seeing how many times they baked something and it was a failure.
Yeah.
So
you have more visibility on
it. Whereas this is a limited visibility that's happening.
Right.
Because you're not co-located with this particular.
That's right. Yeah. I've never flown on a private jet. But and I was an early adopter I'm now in my mid 50s and social media came out when I was in graduate school studying communication. So I was extremely open and experimental to all these things. But within probably 18 months of being on social media, I got off everything. And so the profiles that I maintain currently on social media, somebody else is managing that. And I got off because I can tell you the day I got off social media, was probably 15 years ago now, maybe more. I can tell you exactly which of my friends have been on private jets. And that wasn't doing me any good. I still haven't been on a private jet. But I know the three of my friends who have.
You have musical talent. You should never get on a private jet.
That's right. Yeah, very true.
That ends badly.
That ends badly to anybody who can play an instrument.
Just fine on a private jet, but you.
Yep, I'll be in trouble.
Yep, you're going down, man.
Yeah, and so those comparisons don't work, and you have to. I remember the story of one of our mentors, Howard Prince, the late great Howard Prince. He was in Vietnam in the thick of it as an infantry captain commanding a company, which at the time the tour of duty was 13 months, and the average infantryman lived 8 months. And
that's not good.
No.
That's not good math.
Yeah. And he told me, and he was honest, and he was my boss at the time. It's like, I was terrified. And it's like, I've been afraid of stuff before, but I was actually terrified. So, I asked how were you able to function as the leader of these 120 people if you're terrified? And he says, well, our boss was killed in combat, and they flew out a new guy, and he gathered the 4 company commanders. So it was Howard and 3 other guys, and then this colonel. And he's like, okay, gentlemen, pleased to meet y'all. Just so we're clear and we get it out of the way, I'm terrified. And I assume you are too. But we're going to figure this out, and we're going to do the best we can. Good enough? And Howard said, just hearing his boss acknowledge and just like, I'm terrified, caused him to feel like, okay, I'm not the only one. I thought there was something wrong with my leadership. I thought there was something wrong with my competence.
Right.
Can I do this job? These other people aren't. And he says he remembered, just looking around and the other captains, his peers were like, yeah, us too. Yeah. Right. So it was a clarifying moment. And it's why this idea that we're talking about, we framed it up as why sharing some of your weaknesses or your mistakes or the things that you're afraid of, or to use Brene Brown's lingo on it, being vulnerable, but just being honest about something that doesn't present you in the best light may ironically actually present you in the best light.
It may present you in the best light, but it may also help other people feel safe figuring out how to get themselves into the best light. A much milder story, but the other day I landed and we have somebody who books all our travel. And so I got to and I trust her. So I just get to the rental car and I pull up my phone just to confirm the hotel I'm going to, and there's nothing there. And so then I call her and I can't reach her. So I'm getting a voicemail message and I'm like, hey, I don't see where I'm going. I'm assuming it's this place. I'm going to head that way.
Yeah.
And just let me know if, you get this message. Otherwise I'll figure it out when I get there. And she calls me up and sure enough, I'm not going to that hotel. I was going in that general direction, but I wasn't going to that hotel. And we were kind of laughing and she said, yeah, I just forgot to put it on there. I got sidetracked. And she said, but it really takes a huge amount of pressure off of me to know that you'll just figure it out. But, it was that idea that I'm calling and I'm like, hey, it's not here.
Sure. Yeah.
And obviously that's a mistake on her end.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty certain that there's probably a hotel. And even if there's not, it's fixable. And so I'm just heading in the direction of the gig. And if I don't hear from her, I'm just going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And her having that sense from how we've interacted with her in the past, because there have been problems where we've had to figure it out on the ground. And so it hasn't all been perfect.
Yeah.
She says that
sure.
it feels like it takes a lot of pressure off of her.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I reminded of there seems to be a growing interest in perfectionist research, but just the basic stress that builds up if you're always trying to be perfect or present yourself as.
Or have no mistakes.
Yeah.
Which it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have a high bar, but we also know things get messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. And trying to be too worried about it. I think probably this is a good point to talk about the Adam Grant research about it can be very reaffirming to, as you said, admit mistakes and shortcomings. Adam Grant has done research that suggests an important provision that's when people know you're credible. And if they don't know you're credible, starting off with a weakness or self-deprecating humor can actually be counterproductive. The research from Adam Grant doesn't recommend that if they don't know you, like in a job interview, don't start with
right. Don't start with, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like that's
or that, she's self-deprecating. I'm learning, I'm trying to pick this up. Well, they need to know you're actually have status and credibility before you start with the self-deprecation.
Or the vulnerability, either one. I think it falls up with both.
Yeah. But to be clear, in the vast majority of situations we're in our life, people know us. And so these behaviors tend to work. This being honest, this admitting a mistake or even a weakness. But it doesn't, it's why the classic question of an interview of what's one of your weaknesses is such a trick question.
I hate that question.
The studies suggest don't answer that. Don't answer that honestly, because it's too early.
I've always thought, I mean, obviously you can't care about the job interview, but I've always been tempted with that question to answer it as my greatest weakness is I hate this question.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I used to tell people years ago when I was teaching an interviewing class, I used to tell them, you sometimes work too hard and that.
I know. That's that's been the advice for a while. You frame a strength as a weakness.
Right. Yeah. And like you can hate it.
I hate it. I think it's so.
But the research suggests don't answer that question.
Sure. I can see that. I can see that with the research. They don't know you. So you can't.
They don't know you. And so you tell them a real weakness. Sometimes I procrastinate. Well, that's it. Why you're in this final phase. There's only 3 of you. I cleared these 100 resumes we got. And one person says she works too hard. The other says I procrastinate, was dumb enough to answer it correctly. And the other person says, well, sometimes I get tunnel vision.
Sometimes I care too much.
Right. And so you're not picking the procrastinator.
Right.
So anyway, that's why there's science. We may not like what it says, but you're almost never interviewing for a job. You're almost never an unknown. Usually your life is around embedded relationships where people know you and you do have credibility. And so talking about, go back to Howard's example with Colonel, they knew him. He had been in the unit before doing a different job. And the Army rank confers recognition that this person made it to Colonel. He knows what he's doing. Just like if your doctor walked in and admitted to, I can't believe I was late this morning or whatever, you might actually find that endearing because this is a doctor with the stethoscope in a white suit who you're calling doctor. And so it's important to not overly insist on perfection or that everything always gets better.
And I do think that it's also a lot easier to share the negative story when it's a full dip and then recovery, because I think that's more usable by more people. Because if it's just the dip, if it's just the screw up, too many of those can lead people to think that maybe like reassess your credibility. But when you're telling the oscillating story, and yes, you're getting the dip in there, you're not sugarcoating it. There are lessons in the dip. I mean, we know somebody who went through like a legal issue, and in an environment where like a lot of the professionals in his field are very worried about that particular legal issue. And he came out on the other side, and going through it, nobody was really talking and helping him, which really bothered him. So when he got out on the other side, he's very open about it. And that is endearing to the other people because now they have a sense for what that looks like if it happens to them, or if it is happening to them, they know who to turn to try to get like a deeper idea of how to handle it. And so in that, it's like very good developmentally for the people who are around you. But it wouldn't be like when he was just going through it and nobody knew how it was going to come out. Well, people are like kind of a little hands off.
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. It harms other people if we cover up our negative experiences. Not that we have to air all of our dirty laundry, but all of a sudden you're getting sued and you think I'm the first person to ever get sued, not knowing that you bump into 3 people every day who've been through this. There's just none of them are talking about it. They've buried that, and being willing to be a little more open. I'm thinking about a friend of ours who has been very open. We have a couple very open with their PTSD, and that helps other people not feel like they're the only person going through something like that.
And I think in that particular case, and in many of the cases, I think it also helps them rewrite who goes through PTSD. It's not It's not somebody who is weak on any level.
Right. It's not just the losers.
Right.
To use a generic term, to exaggerate, to make a point.
Right.
It's this person here, and I respect this person. It's this person here, and I respect her. And okay, I'm going through this as well. how am I going to make it? And it's important to know that people made it through when you're in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's witness that there may be a way out. And that's tricky because you don't want to trivialize what somebody else is going through. They're actually in the valley and you've already come through it. But knowing that it's possible to make it through and that people are willing to be honest with you about their own shortfalls, I think is very, very encouraging. I mean, it's been a very long time, but one of the scariest things that I ever went through was the Army's Ranger School. And one of the best things that ever happened to me is that a great friend of mine, Billy Gonzer, went through a full year in front of me. And I knew Billy, and he was very open about this was terrible, and I failed this, and then this happened, and then this was all messed up, and then blah, blah. But at the end, he made it. And so when I got into Ranger School a year later, and I started failing things and things were going bad for me, I could actually tell myself, like,
I
this
still have
happened to Billy
a
Gonzer.
possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, he got through this. He told me the same things. He failed this, he failed that, he failed this. And so weirdly, in one of the most kind of high intensity few months of my life, I felt no pressure to be perfect. And that helped me put one step in front of the other and make it through. And that's due to, a number of people, but especially Billy Gonzer, who he could have set himself up to be the great, shining, successful Ranger School graduate.
Or he could have just said nothing.
He could have chosen to be a hero in my eyes, but that's not what he told me. He told me about the stuff he was bad at. And he told me about the things he failed. And I can't put a price on that for when I was actually in the soup failing. And that's, I think, the purpose of this episode. In some ways, the manager is kind of set up, in air quotes, to be the hero, but don't accept that.
Yeah, they're in a leadership position.
Yeah.
And we generally have an image of a leader as somebody who always knows what they're doing.
Yeah, your choice is to present a two-dimensional version of yourself, heavy on impression management, that doesn't show some of the struggles, or being willing to show a little more about where you're challenged, how you persevered, where you've made mistakes before, concerns that you have. So there are a lot of other ways you can act. Yes, but if the choice is between those two, I think the science and what we're saying in this conversation would suggest you're better off telling people, you're better off showing people a little more of what you actually feel and explaining a little more where you had setbacks, so that when they hit their own roadblocks, they won't feel like they're the only one.
Right. You are indirectly impacting their expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, which gets us all the way back to the story we started with of the oscillating narratives. It wasn't knowing the trivia of the family. It wasn't, you can't take kids, teach them family trivia, and then have them be more resilient. It has to happen organically because the kids are exposed to, age appropriate, a little bit of the good, the bad, and the crazy. So that when they face a setback or a shock, they're not thinking that they're the first person in their tribe to ever face such a thing. And they can go back and find another connecting story, their own Billy Gonzer story, if you will, and put a foot in front of the other and make it through. That's resiliency. And that's why leaders and managers taking the risk to share a little more isn't the liability that it might seem.
Right. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. And we always appreciate likes, subscribes,
all of it,
all of that stuff. So help us out.
Do it.
See you next time.
All righty.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.